Mama, I have my own life to live. I cannot be your eyes forever. I'm 24 years old, not 40.
I know I am burdened to you, Winnie. I know my blindness is not what you planned for either. But you are still my child.
What if your neighbors were keeping a secret from you? This is a story about a young woman named Winnie. 24-year-old, beautiful face, sharp tongue, hard heart. She had a mother, a good woman, a woman who had carried her on her back when her legs were too weak, a woman who had prayed over her when she was sick, a woman who had sold her only good wrapper at the market just to pay Winnie's school fees. Mrs. Clark was blind, and to Winnie, that blindness was not something to feel sorry for. No, to Winnie, her mother's blindness was an embarrassment, a burden, a wahala she did not ask for. But then, come to think of it all, while Winnie was busy being ashamed of her mother, who was taking care of Mrs. Clark? Stay with me. A modest compound in a small African town, morning light fillers through a tin curtain. Winnie woke up every morning with one plan: to leave the house as fast as possible. She would bathe quickly, dress well. Her clothes were always fine, neat and elegant. She would pick up her phone and walk out that door without saying good morning to her mother, the woman sitting alone in the parlor. Her mother, Mrs. Clark, would be sitting in the same wooden chair, the one near the window, her hands folded in her laps, her eyes open but saying nothing. She always woke up before her daughter. She always sat in that chair, waited, not for anything big, just to hear her daughter's voice, just to know she was there. Mrs. Clark tilted her head, listening for her daughter's footsteps. Winnie, my daughter, is that you? Have you eaten anything this morning? Winnie would not even answer. She would not even slow down. And then she replied, Mama, I'm going out. I don't have that time. And the door would close. Just like that every single morning. And Mrs. Clark would sit back in that chair and she would nod slowly and she would say nothing. The neighbors heard everything. They observed it. The sound travels far in a quiet African street. Mama Chica next door would hear the door slam. She would shake her head and go back to stirring her morning pap that she's cooking. Baba Amos across the road would hear it and hiss under his breath. Even the children playing outside, the little ones who barely reached the window, they knew what was going on. They knew that the blind woman inside the house was alone again. Flashback 3 months earlier. 3 months ago, things were not always like this, right? But change happened. It was not always this bad. When Mrs. Clark first lost her sight, it happened slowly and gradually. Winnie had been there for her. She was helpful at first. She had held her mother's hand at the clinic. She had helped her walk around the house from the room. But as the weeks turned to months, something changed inside Winnie. She started to see her mother differently, not as a woman who needed help, but as a problem that was getting in the way of her life. Winnie would always say, Mama, I have my own life to live. I cannot be your eyes forever. I'm 24 years old, not 40. Those words cut deep. Deep enough that Mrs. Clark stopped asking her own daughter for help. She stopped asking Winnie to guide her. She stopped asking Winnie to guide her to the bathroom at night. A woman who stops asking is not a woman who no longer needs help, but a woman who had learned not to accept help from certain persons due to circumstances. Early morning, Mama Chica's kitchen, the smell of firewood and hot okra soup filled the air. Winnie did not know. She had no idea about what was going on the other side of the tin wall. Every morning, before the sun got too hot, Mama Chica would finish her own cooking and then do something she had been doing for months. She would wrap a portion of food in a small pot, put it in an old shopping bag, walk quietly to the back window of Mrs. Clark's house, the one that was always slightly open, and knocked softly 2 times, always 2 times. Mrs. Clark would answer, Is that my Chica? Mama Chica would say, Yes, Mama, it's me. I brought you your breakfast. Sit down, let me pass it through. And just like that, without any drama, without any noise, a plate of food appeared through that window. Mama Chica never came inside. She never made a scene. She just fed the woman and left. On Mondays and Thursdays, it was Sister Lovett, a young woman from the church from the next street after Mrs. Clark's street, who would come to help Mrs. Clark bathe and change her clothes. She would knock on the front door softly so as not to wake Winnie, unknown to her that Winnie is not around because Winnie was usually already gone. God bless you, my daughter. God will not forget what you're doing for me. Don't thank me, Mama. Just eat well and stay strong. Sister Lovett will respond. On rainy evening, it was Baba Amos who made sure the leaking part of Mrs. Clark's roof had a bucket under it because She could not see where the water was falling. In the night, when there is no lights, which was often, it was a young boy, Eju, only 19 years old, who would come and sit with her for an hour or so. She would not be alone in the dark. The boy sits on a mat beside her chair, telling her stories about what happened at school that. And then what happened? Did your teacher catch him? Mrs. Clark would ask. Mama Clark, he ran so fast, even the teacher was laughing. Ejiro would respond. And Mrs. Clark would laugh, the kind of laugh that Winnie had not heard from her mother in a very long time. The whole village was holding Mrs. Clark all quietly, secretly, with no reward or no recognition. But Mama Chica could no longer tolerate it anymore. So one day, Mama Chica, frustrated, tired, fed up with the whole situation, turned to Sister Lovett after leaving Mrs. Clark's window and said what everyone was thinking and keeping to themselves. Mama Chica spoke. Lovett, that girl Winnie, we should tell her now. We should go to her and tell her what we are doing, what she's supposed to be doing. We cannot possibly continue to take care of her mother while she's somewhere flexing. Let her feel ashamed. Let her feel the shame. Let the whole street hear it. Because what she is doing to her mother is not right. It is not human at all. Sister Lovett was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made Mama Chica stop. Sister Lovett said, Mama Chica, it was Mrs. Clark herself who asked us not to say a word to her daughter, not to confront her. Silence. Even the birds stopped chirping. Mama Chica said, what? Then Sister Lovett responded. The very first day I came to help her, she held my hand and she said to me, Lovett, please, whatever you do for me, do not let my daughter know. Do not shame her. She's still my child. One day, God will touch her heart. But until that day, please protect her name. Mama Chica stood there with her mouth open, a blind woman being mistreated by her own daughter, and her biggest concern was still protecting that daughter's reputation. What kind of love is that? What kind of mother will protect her daughter to that extent? A hot Wednesday afternoon, the compound is quiet. Winnie comes home earlier than usual. Her plans fell through. Winnie had been out since morning. As usual, she had planned to meet her friends at a shop in town, but the rain came down hard and her plan for the day scattered. She came back home earlier. She was irritated, wet, not in the mood for anybody at all. She pushed open the gates and stopped. As she looked inside the compound, she saw Sister Lovett carrying a basin of warm water into the house. And through the open window, she could hear Mama Chica's voice saying, lift your arm a little, Mama. That's good. You are doing well. Winnie stood there. Something moved in her chest. Something uncomfortable. She walked to the window and looked inside. Her mother was sitting on a small stool while Mama Chica carefully washed her back. Sister Lovett was laying out clean clothes on the bed. Everything was organized. Everything was neat. These two women, neighbors, strangers by blood, were doing what a daughter was supposed to do. Winnie's hand gripped the window frame, her throat tightened. She walked inside and Winnie said, Mama Chica, what is going on here? What are you doing in my mother's room? The two women looked up. Sister Lovett looked at Mama Chica. Mama Chica looked at Mrs. Clark. Mrs. Clark's blind eyes landed in the direction of her daughter. Mrs. Clark said, Winnie, you're back early. My daughter. Mama, I am asking what is happening. Why is Mama Chica beating you? Since when? How long has this been going on? Winnie responded. Nobody answered. There was silence in the room after the question. Typical African silence. Winnie's eyes went from her mother to the two women. Then around the room, she noticed things she had never noticed before. A small pot near the corner, one she did not recognize, a fresh bar of soap on the bathroom lodge, one she had not bought, a folded clothes on the chair, clean and pressed by someone else's hand. How long? She needed to know. How long had this been going on? Mama Chica, I'm asking you, how long? Winnie asked. Mama Chica drew a slow breath. She looked at Mrs. Clark one more time and then she said, 6 months, Mama Chica responded. The room went very quiet. 6 months. In those 6 months, Winnie had eaten her food, wore fine clothes, gone out with her friends, slept in her warm bed, and her blind mother had been fed, bathed, and cared for by neighbors and strangers. Winnie said, but why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't you say something? Sister Lovett looked at her, not with anger. It's something worse than anger, with pity. Your mother asked us not to, Sister Lovett responded. Winnie slowly turned to her mother, Mrs. Clark. Mama, Winnie called out. Mrs. Clark's voice was calm, almost too calm. Come and sit down, Winnie, Mrs. Clark answered. Mama, why? Why would you ask them to hide this from me? Winnie asked. Because you're my daughter, and in this village, people talk, and I did not want them talking about you negatively. I did not want anybody to look at you and say, that is the girl who abandoned her mother, even if it was true. I did not want them to say it, Mrs. Clark responded, with tears welling up in her eyes. Winnie opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I know I am a burden to you, Winnie. I know my blindness is not what you planned for. It is not what I planned for either. But you are still my child. Whether you care for me or not, you are still my child. And a mother does not use her children's mistakes as a weapon. The afternoon light falls across Mrs. Clark's face. She is not crying. She's steady. She made peace with things her daughter has not even begun to understand yet. Winnie's news shifted. She did not plan it. It just happened. She sank to the ground. She knelt down right there on the floor. She wept, not a small cry. She cried, emotional tears, the kind that sounds like breaking. And what did her blind mother do? Mrs. Clark reached out her hand, searching in the dark the way she always did. And when her fingers found Winnie's head, she placed her palm on it gently and she began to pray out loud over her daughter who had ignored her for months. Father Lord, touch this child. She does not know what she's doing. Open her eyes, Lord, the way you open mine, even in this darkness. Open her eyes. Let us see what love really means. Mrs. Clark would pray over her daughter. Machika had to step out. She could not stand the weight of that moment. Even from outside the window, Ejo, who had come to return a bucket, stood frozen on the spot, listening. 1 week later, the same compound, but something is different. Change does not always come like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, like the first cool breeze after a long, hot, dry season. The morning after that Wednesday, Winnie woke up earlier than usual. She did not pick up her phone, she did not rush to the door, she went to the kitchen, she boiled the water, made tea the way her mother liked it, with ginger and a little honey. She cut a small piece of bread, put it on a plate with a cloth on top to keep the flies away, and she carried it to the parlor. Her mother was in a chair, same folded hands, and this time, when the footsteps came, she did not walk past, unlike before. Mama, good morning, ma. I made you tea. Let me help you, Winnie spoke out. Mrs. Clark turned her head slowly. She was quiet for a long moment, and then slowly a smile spread across her face. But her smile said everything. Come, my daughter, sit with me a while before you go, Mrs. Clark demanded. Winnie sat down. She discussed and spoke with her mother. Simple discussion, the kind of talk that costs nothing but means everything. When Mama Chika looked through the window that morning, expecting to pass the usual morning food, she stopped. She saw Winnie guarding her mother's hand to the teacup. She stood there for a long moment and then she smiled, turned around and went back with her pot of food. For the first time in 6 months, it was not needed anymore, and she thanked God for that. She started learning how to describe things to her mother, the color of the sky, what people were wearing at church, what the market looked like. She became her mother's eyes, and Mrs. Clark, who had prayed every night without her daughter knowing, never once said, I told you so. She never brought up the 6 months ordeal. She never reminded Winnie of the mornings she left without saying a word. She just received her daughter like a prodigal daughter.